What does it mean to be called crazy in a crazy world? Listen to Madness Radio, Voices and Visions from Outside Mental Health. Sponsored by peer-run support communities Freedom Center, the Icarus Project, and Portland Hearing Voices. Madness Radio can be heard on FM stations on the Pacifica Radio Network and is online at kboo.fm/madnessradio. Welcome to Madness Radio. This is your host, Will Hall. Today, my guest is Bhargavi Davar. Bhargavi is a childhood survivor of mental institutions. She's a philosopher and psychologist and founder and director of Bapu Trust, a mental health and disability agency in Pune, India, and working throughout Asia. She's also a coordinator of INTAR, the International Network Towards Alternatives and Recovery. So, welcome to Madness Radio, Bhargavi Davar.
Hi, Will, and hi, everyone from India. This is Bhargavi from Pune.
It's great to have you on the show, Bhargavi. I've known you from some international conferences. We were at the International Hearing Voices Congress in Spain, and you're doing a lot of work in India and throughout Asia promoting peer supports and alternatives to the mental health system. So it's great to have you on the show.
I am happy to be here after so many months after Spain, and it was lovely to meet you there.
It's very interesting to have you on the show because we know that the pharmaceutical industry and the medical model and the diagnostic and statistical manual is a global phenomenon, and there's an effort to kind of so-called modernize and really westernize other cultures. And so we're going to be talking about the situation with mental health in India and really trying to get beyond a lot of the stereotypes and the misconceptions. We tend to have a view that's either very, very negative or very, very romanticized of what is happening in Asia and India. So we're going to be talking about that. But maybe we could just begin by hearing about how you yourself got connected to and involved in the mental health system, and then how you went on to become a psychologist and to work as an advocate for change.
I spent a lot of time during my childhood years when I was about 5 or 6 years old, roaming the old mental asylums. India, for a long time, and even now, we continue to have the old colonial type warehousing kind of institutions, with large acres of land, large buildings, the panopticon kind of invigilance with bare rooms, lock-up wards, solitary confinement, the old ECT machines. We still have many of them. So my mother used to be in lockup, and when I was about 5 or 6.
She was a patient in one of these institutions?
And that's the mystery that I've tried to kind of solve through the years, Was she mad, or was she spiritual? Was she in search of God? Was she bad? Was she a bad woman? I know her when very, very small, as a loving mom, someone who used to dress me up in pretty clothes and do my hair and take me out and stuff like that. I have a brother too, and both of us were very attached to her. She was, she was very much in prayer for most of the time. She was very creative. She could write poetry, mostly devoted to God, some of the Hindu gods that she was very fond of. And she could decorate the house and, the God's room and everything for hours, and also dress herself up in ways which are considered as sacred, I would say. Wearing certain type of clothes, not wearing certain other types of clothes, and so on and so forth. So, and sooner or later, people started seeing this as a kind of obsession. And she also then started to hear voices. She would speak to gods and goddesses. But she was, as far as I know, she wrote very coherent verses which were revered by the spiritualists in and around my household.
She wrote verses. She wrote poetry.
Poetry, yeah. She was a good Sanskrit scholar. She had learned Sanskrit, and she could write poetry in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is a very ancient language, and it's not easy to write poetry in Sanskrit. But she was able to do this, and but over a period of time, those kinds of actions by her were just seen as some kind of madness, because it definitely took away the time that she had to give to managing the household and a very large family. of brothers and sisters, their sons and daughters, and so on. We had what is called a joint family, a traditional Tamil Brahmin joint family. So she was expected, being the eldest daughter-in-law, she was expected to kind of be of service to the family, and and she didn't have much time for that. So
Because she was so interested in her spiritual pursuits,
yeah,
which were quite serious and quite scholarly. It sounds like.
yeah, and she was also an artist. She could draw and paint. She was a great cook. Anyway, I think so. At some point, my family started seeing all of this as some kind of madness, and then the traditional healers came in, and then the psychiatric doctors came in, and then she was rounded up and literally tied up and taken to the local mental hospital. My childhood memories are of her being chained, with literally with iron chains, spread eagled and iron chained in those old, bare, cold, solitary confinement wards. And my memories from childhood are of her being given shock treatment, the old, smelly corridors of these really degraded old infrastructure. And if you hang around with someone, with your mom, who is a voice hearing person at the age of 4 or 5, you also end up hearing voices. It's like you could see her ghosts, and you could see her gods, and you could see the devil, doing a dance around your house every night wearing red clothes, and you can see spirits walking down the stairs every night. So my childhood and my brother's childhood were filled with really, really strange events, inexplicable, sometimes blissful, and sometimes scary. I remember I had the most blissful dreams about God when I was very tiny. At my age, I'm 54 this year, and I'm starting to have those kinds of visions now. But I think at that time, they were all pretty scary.
So it sounds like your mom was in conflict with other family members, and they expected her to play the role of the household wife and the mother, and to be doing the domestic work. And yet she was very interested in her spiritual beliefs and her spiritual path. Do you think it would have been different if she was a man?
Yes, I think so, because men, it's okay for the men to be in prayer. In fact, it's prayer is an area which is dominated by masculinity in Indian traditional households. Maybe there would have been some stigma if the man was in prayer and not earning any money. They are called the renouncers, and they are also stigmatized. Men who renounce and don't get employed and bring money home, they are equally stigmatized in traditional families. For example, they tend to lose their inheritance, they tend to lose their stake in family business, in property, in household resources, and so on and so forth. And sometimes they just get kicked out of their homes. And so it's equally bad for you to be a male renouncer.
Would the male renouncers also risk ending up in psychiatric hospitals?
Maybe not, because their escape route is fairly easy compared to the women. Women find it difficult to escape. And this is something we've found in the communities where we work, the low income communities as well. The men who want to live a life of difference and deviance, they have greater freedoms to wander away, and be on the streets, befriend people on the streets, make their living or make a life on the streets. Whereas for the women, it's house arrest, never leave home, or end up in a local institution. Necessarily just the mental hospital, but there are also the beggars' homes. There are the women's shelters. So on the India is full of these old colonial structures. So you can end up one or the other of them.
When she was taken to traditional healers and then to psychiatry, were there other people in the family who were defending her? Was there anybody who was really standing up for her right to be a renouncer and to be following a spiritual path and not the path of a mother and a householder?
Not at all, I'm really sad. This is the saddest part of my life, and I think, and this sadness which has really brought me into my line of work. It's a sadness, the guilt of not having seen any help coming to her, not being able to help her. I was too tiny, 5 years and 6 years. My rational mind tells me that, look, it was not your fault. But the deepest part of me is very sad that there was no one to help her, and so I've seen lots of atrocities committed on her. You know, she would run away from the mental institution, then they would set the police after her. The police would literally tie her up in in ropes and bring her home tied up, and then she would be shunted off to the mental hospital. So these are old memories, and these are really, really hard to forget. Um, I think that's what has stayed with me after all these years. And I mean, I've tried my hand at having my own personal life, getting married, having boyfriends, trying to go to parties, but none of those things ever stayed with me for very long. It's just those memories which get triggered off every now and then, and I'm having to just pursue the path of working for change. I think there was a deep connection between me and my mom when she was in prayer. I was about 4 or 5, maybe, when she was in deep prayer. She would wake up really early in the morning, say about 4 o'clock, and then she would spend a lot of time, decorating the gods in her god room.
She had a God room, a special place for prayer and for her sanctuary.
Yep, we had all kinds of gods in the house. And I remember one morning there was this particular picture that she had brought home the previous night of a male god, and she was like very secretive about it. And then she said, "No, you can't see it. It's too late tonight. So I'm going to show it to you tomorrow morning. I'll have everything decorated, and then you can see him." And I said, "Okay." And then I went off to sleep. And then at 4 o'clock, I had this really brilliant vision of this god in full splendor, and fully decorated with all the kinds of flowers that I hadn't seen actually. But the whole God's room was decorated, and there was this particular picture, very resplendent and very brilliant, lit up and everything. Then I woke up, and my mom had not even entered the God's room at this time. It was about 4 in the morning, and she was just had a bath. And I described to her in complete detail what the picture was and how the picture was decorated. And she was shocked, and she said, "No, you couldn't have known this because you've not seen this yet." I said, "Well, I saw it in my dreams." And so she said that, okay, of course. And she had, of course, a very spiritual explanation why God came to me. And she was full of apologies for not having shown me the God's picture the previous night when I asked for it to be shown to me. So,
So in the dream, you saw the God that was in the picture that your mother had brought home, but you hadn't actually seen it yet. You hadn't seen how she was decorating it. And
yeah. It was not like my mom to be secretive, she would have just shown it to me. And it was one of those rare times when she said, "No, I'm not going to show you. I'll show it to you after I'm done with it. And so she was quite surprised. And she was, of course, she had goosebumps because she thought that God had arrived into my life in the morning. That's how I remember my mom and our life with her. My brother had even more strange experiences, and both of us do over a period of time, carry these experiences of something strange and uncanny happening to us every now and then. My brother has had lots and lots of strange experiences. I mean, he carries a lot of my mom in him, and I guess both of us carry her genes with us, of course. And so, one story I remember is, my brother is a photographer, and he has a little tiny lab in Chennai, that's south of India. And he says that every time he goes into the lab, he feels a really strong negative presence. And he's got a photograph one side of the wall, and the photograph somehow, it gets pushed in as if someone has physically pushed the photograph in with their foot or with their hands or something. And he couldn't figure this out. Every time he straightened it, it was like somebody had thumped it once again. And one evening he was sitting there, and then he actually had a vision of someone who had hung himself from that very room. And he had a vision of this spirit, and the spirit, and he said, "Look, why are you bothering me? I don't want to see you. I don't want to hear you. I know you're there. You can continue to be here, but I don't want to have much to do with you." So, and the spirit said, "Look, you guys, it's you who's renovated this particular wall and this particular pillar in between, and I have no space to move. Every day I try to communicate with you by trying to push that photograph so that you'll at least notice something is going on over here. Now please, release this pillar and release me from here. So, and my brother said that that's the first thing that he did. He just got up and got someone and pulled the pillar down, and the thing went away. So, and many of these things happened to him. They happened to him all the time. I saw Jesus Christ on my garden last Easter. This was a brilliant young man with the most brilliant, beautiful, smile I ever saw in my life, fully robed in white, and it's a moment that you're never going to forget in your life, but yet it doesn't last very long. It's like gone in an instant, but it leaves such a deep, as if someone has punched you, right in the pit of your stomach, very, very hard. It was that kind of impact.
So this was just in your garden. You saw this man and you realized that it was Jesus Christ.
It was Easter morning. I was doing my gardening, and it was a very bright, sunny morning, bright sunlight. And in one shaded part of my garden, Jesus Christ shows up and gives me this absolutely amazing, endearing, embracing smile, and he's gone. So it's absolutely, it blissed me out. Yeah, it was really good.
And in those moments, do you feel a connection to your mother and her own experiences?
Yeah, I do actually. I think so. My brother might have more of a sense of connection with her experiences of voice hearing than me, but I do have them on and off more as I grow older. And I spent to complete that story. I spent a large part of my life being a complete atheist. I hated gods and I hated my mom, for what this all did to me. Having to live this kind of haunted life, carrying my memories around with me, making me feel quite heavy, sad, and somewhat sad.
So what happened with your mother and her experience has really been lifelong for you. You've carried it with you ever since. And when she was going through this, was she sort of communicating in kind of an understandable way? Would she talk about what she was going through, or was she very sort of distracted and off in her own world? Did she try and explain it or argue or defend herself when they started to say, well, look, you need to get healing, you need to go to the psychiatrist, and then eventually they took her away to the institution?
In Indian families, in Indian traditional Indian families, women don't speak out much, especially if you're the eldest daughter-in-law. So I don't think she was very understood, and her father was had passed on, and she didn't have many supports from her own family. Her sisters had married and they had gone and settled in other countries very far away. They were barely in touch with her. And so she didn't have much supports. She was completely dependent on my father and his large family. Yeah, and so I don't think so. She had the courage to speak out, and her way of descent was to get in more and more into her spiritual practice. And soon she kind of manifested like a monk. She wore monk's clothes. She took off all the signs of marriage that women in the south of India usually wear on them, like wearing bangles and wearing a bindi, wearing certain kinds of chains and wearing certain kinds of saris in a certain way. So all those things she just shed, and she shaved her head, and she wore monk's clothes, and she wore a monk's beads, and she was in the house. And then they decided this is it, she can't live in the house anymore.
So this was just an escalating conflict with her husband, and she was just continuing to pursue and go farther into the spiritual world. And you had said that there were some scary things that you remember, some scary stories. Would you want to share those?
Throughout our life in the south of India, both my brother and I have had several, and I think somehow even in our adult life, until very recently, until the age of like 48 or so, we've carried stories of evil spirits with us, in one way or the other. And so we felt very strongly that there were spirits in the house where we lived as children and into adolescence. And around that, there were many scary stories, strange animals, strange birds, strange behaviors of animals. strange smells, strange visions. I remember waking up one morning in my old house, opening the front door at 5 in the morning and finding 1,000 snakes all coiled one on top of each other right in front of my house. Yeah, I don't know if this is a memory or if this really happened, but we lived in a snake infested area. And so those are the things, and there are many, even when I say this story, I have goosebumps, because those are the kinds, whether it's true or not at this point, it doesn't matter, because I had so many of these and they're all settled in my hind brain as trauma memories, and they've haunted me all these years, and I've lost a life. I lived, I've lost a life, in this process. I continue to believe in them. I believe that even in the house where I live, there are spirits. They may not be evil, but they occupy this house, and I sense them every now and then. I go into goosebumps when I feel these energies, and this is true of many people where there is schizophrenia or hearing voices experiences or extreme states experienced by families. I think this is a very common experience. I don't know if those spirits are really there or it's just my brain acting up. Or I have no clue about those things, but it's a real experience. I had to settle scores with my father because I was really, really upset with him for having treated my mother in an extremely bad manner, constantly pushing her into the mental hospital, prohibiting us from meeting her ever. So she went and lived in a temple for many years. So by herself. And yeah, and when we finally went to meet her, like 10 years after she left our home,
So she had gotten out of the mental hospitals and ended up living in a spiritual temple.
yeah, she would just run away from there. She would just run away from these institutions.
Uh-huh.
And
Good for her.
yeah, good for her. Well, the thing is, we lost complete contact with her because, I think my father would have let us visit her if she was mad. But if she was in search of God, then that's her fate, and we couldn't go and visit ever. Yeah. So she lived in a temple for many years, and when finally we kind of both had grown into full adults and about 2021, we told our dad that we want her back, and so we searched her out in an old temple somewhere in south of India. We found her in a really small shabby room, and I'll not forget, this is another of those memories, and it's one of those things that left a lingering doubt in me, which has pursued me all my life, is, was she really crazy? Because when we entered the room, the entire wall of that room was filled with her incoherent writings. She was incoherent. She wasn't wearing much clothes on her. Her room was shabby. It was very filthy and dirty. There were things scattered all around in that room, and she was not there, her soul was not there.
Do you think it might have made a difference if she hadn't been pushed out of the family? That maybe she could have been prevented from kind of going to such an extreme incoherence?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so that is the larger part of the guilt. Where was she those 10 years? Did she sleep on the streets? Who fed her? Who gave her clothes? How did she walk to these temples? Did she have money? Did someone rape her? What happened to her? What was her story those 10 years when she was not in our lives? So those questions haven't left me, at the age of 54.
So you found your mother in this temple in southern India, and she was in this very shabby room. That must have been remarkable to see her after 10 years.
Yeah, yeah, it was. And those are not memories. She was not in a state where we could speak to her, so I have no memory of speaking to her. Uh, we brought her back, and my father burnt all the stuff that we brought back with us, many, many registers of writing, notebooks, colors, paper with the drawings, photographs. He burned all of them. He burned all of them. Yeah, some of them have survived, and we continue to keep them. But it's really, those were really sad things that have happened. And then they started her on psychiatric medication again. And truth to tell, she did improve with those medicines. But by this time, she was completely disabled. Waist down. She had completely lost all motor functions. She didn't live very long after this. She passed on just after my dad. Both of them died pretty young.
So you say she did improve with the medications. What sort of improvement did you see?
Well, we could hold a conversation with her. She still continued to talk to gods. She became a local healer, by the way. We lived in an area where there were lots of construction workers and their kids who were falling sick all the time. So, in the evenings, she would have a really relaxed bath, and she would wear her silk saris and dress up like a goddess, and she would have a manifestation as a kind of a healer, and she would have her little herbs and little rituals, and then the children would come and then she would heal them and they were happy, and my family was my brother was happy too because he kind of really respected that role that she played in our lives towards the end of our life. So
And was she helping to heal people in the local community there?
yeah, yeah, she was for quite a few years. She was considered the local healer and a goddess and manifestation of a goddess. So
Do you feel it was the medications that helped her to kind of be in that role and to be able to carry conversations and to interact with people, or
yeah, I think so that the medication she was on at the time helped her to hold coherent conversations. But I also think it was the love that was available to her in the household.
the love that was available?
Yeah, yeah. My brother and his wife took good care of her, So she had Parkinson's and all the tardive dyskinesia and all the symptoms, and she died pretty young. But I think so for 3 4 years, it gave her somewhat of a good quality of life that she may not have experienced before. So, and but I'm not sure of that because I had no idea what happened to her for 10 years of her life. So.
And did she talk about what had happened to her in those 10 years?
I don't think any of us had the words to talk about what had happened because it was many years of not knowing or knowing some really bad things which have happened to her. And I don't think I know that I certainly did not have the words to speak to her about what had happened. And by the time I felt that, okay, I really need to know because otherwise I'm going crazy. By then she had passed on.
So this was a very powerful influence in your own childhood. Did you yourself start to struggle with difficult emotional states or get into conflicts or get drawn into strong spiritual practice like your mother?
Well, through most of my younger years, I was an atheist. I hated gods.
Huh.
Um,
How come?
I,
Why do you think you were an atheist?
because my house was surrounded by them. I saw gods in every nook and corner. There were gods all over. It was raining gods in my house. And oh man, it was like that. And so, and Hindus are great at idol worship. So there were idols all over the place, and there were these scriptures and these hymns and these mantras and the chantings and the hums. And oh man, it was like really
It was raining gods in your house, so you became an atheist.
atheist, Marxist, critical thinker. I escaped these problems for a long time by being a total rationalist. I will go with only what I see, what I hear, what I smell, what I touch, and what my mind tells me is true, for many years. So that's how I turned to philosophy and stuff. But I was pretty much a withdrawn child, very much introverted. And my traumas came up as very, very strong nightmares, strange experiences. I lived a life of loneliness without friendships, without being able to speak. I had a major stutter and a stammer. I was invisible,
A major stutter.
a stutter, yeah. I used to stutter. I couldn't speak. I would barely ever slip out of my room to come before a relative or a friend who is visiting. And so neither I nor my brother received much attention for what we might have been going through at the point, and definitely nobody noticed anything strange about my withdrawal. I was working, and so people said, okay, now she's working and she's producing such excellent food for us day after day, then she's going to be all right. But those memories lived with me more than the depression. I had an acute crisis when I was about 34, 35, and it took me 4 years to get out of that. It was really, really bad. I had nightmares, and I had days and days of crying, anger, breaking things, suicidal attempts, lots and lots of thoughts of dying. I was drawing energies from the universe. like nobody's business. It was like there was just me, and I was consuming myself day in and day out.
Drawing
You know,
energies from the universe. What do you mean?
when I was in that state, somehow, and I wasn't even dying. I was trying to kill myself. I wasn't going anywhere, and so there was something around me which was keeping me alive, for which I was very grateful later on. But I certainly was drawing from whatever it was that was there around me. There weren't people. If there were people around me, they would have put me inside. So those were really, really bad times. I had no faith in psychiatric institutions, so I never went to meet a psychiatrist.
Was that because of what had happened to your mother?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I couldn't imagine ever visiting a psychiatrist for fear of being institutionalized. My friend, who's a clinical psychologist, said that I probably need medicines, and then I said, I'm not going to have medicines, and I'm going to try this my own way. One of the things that really caused the depression was a deep spiritual crisis for which I found an answer. I lost my daughter, and that's what tripped me off. My daughter was born terribly, terribly sick, and she had complicated medical conditions which was not even diagnosable. Every day, 24 by 7, she was in pain and a little closer to death every day. And I was by her side 24 by 7 until she died in my arms. Of course, after that, I went completely crazy. I mean, I was completely not there for 4 years. And that was the spiritual experience. That's what brought me back to my own spiritual existence. When I started thinking about life and death in a very different way. Earlier, I did not have an answer to the question, should I die? And after I went through this experience, it was like, no, life was not given to me by me. Life is precious, life is always short, and we always wear death like a tissue around our wrist. And so what life we have is really what we make of it. So that came to me, and I made several resolutions about making the best of the time that I had with me. And this came to me, when I was about 40 or so, and made some really, really drastic decisions. I moved out of my marriage. I got a divorce. I cut my hair. I changed the way I dress. I changed the way I walk. I went into lots and lots of healing activities. I made a resolve to be of use to the universe. So that's when spirituality started coming to me, after I lost my child.
And when did you start to become a mental health advocate and founder of the Bapu Trust?
I lost my daughter in 1994. And so 5 years later, Bapu Trust was born. Bapu is the name, in fact, of my mother. It's in dedication to my mother and her life, which for me is iconic for India and for Asia.
How do you mean that it's iconic for India and Asia?
A lot of women go through what she did. A lot of women go through what she did. And so every day we get calls. Even yesterday we had a Skype call, someone who was deviant in some way or the other. She's getting psychiatrized, getting pushed into a mental hospital. Husband is filing for divorce, not giving her alimony, taking away the kids. It's iconic. It's till today. And we are a post colonial state. And so we have lots and lots of these laws where if you're a deviant woman, then to put you away in an institution and file for divorce is really, really easy.
So deviant in the sense of becoming very religious and no longer being interested in being the role of the mother and the householder and doing the domestic work. And
Not just that, yeah, not just being a renouncer. It could be that you're not following certain stereotypes of being a woman. So it could be any deviance from the feminine stereotype. And Indian laws allow easy divorce on grounds of lunacy or unsoundness of mind. We have all those laws from Anglo-Saxon, times. So we have many of those laws. 150, 160 laws exist in India.
so the husbands will use the divorce as a way of just casting the woman aside, and then she has no resources, she has no support.
Yeah, yeah. So, and that's why Bapu is iconic. She stands for all the women who are treated in this way in India.
And you see these stories all the time.
Yeah, sometimes when we have the resources and when the women are close by, we go and help them out with legal assistance or other kinds of advocacy. We've run campaigns to get women out of institutions. Suzette Gomes from Mumbai, got married to a man she loved, and sooner or later they had conflicts. And she was a very assertive woman, and the man, he went on to have a affair with another woman, wanted her out of the house. So slowly he started building up a case of insanity, started taking her to the doctor for shock treatments, and a private doctor was found who could certify her insane. And using the insanity certificate, she was put in an institution where she was doped out of her wits for a month. Nobody knew where she was. Her mother had to call in the police to find out where she was. Mother brought her out, and it's been 8 years she struggled with the courts, trying to prove that she was not insane and that the husband has fabricated insanity and put her away for vested interests. Finally, she won the case, and the court did acknowledge that she is not eligible for divorce because the husband has manufactured insanity. But in this 8 years, the husband did every trick in the book, to kick her out of her house, and he took custody of the children, estranged the children from her, called her mad, tried to take her away from her church, didn't give her any money, and it's like mother's story all over again. So, and just now, Suzette has been talking to me about some women she knows who are going through exactly the same process. This is all not okay. So I started to get into activism about 15 years ago. 15 years ago, I say, 15, 20 years ago. After my daughter died, I joined the women's movement and started really understanding what gender inequality means and what is how to analyze social relationships in terms of structural hierarchies and power. And then the feminist movement introduced me to a lot of new concepts in activism.
It sounds that the subordinate position of women traditionally in India is very much reinforced by psychiatry acting as kind of like a police force, that the husbands can just go off and get a psychologist or a psychiatrist to support them in these divorces that then just push the woman away and cast her aside and deny her any kind of resources and often cut her off from her children.
Yeah, in the case of men, it works differently because we have property and contract laws which say that a person who's of unsound mind cannot enter into contracts. So, if there are two or three brothers and there are large properties to be divided within a family, you'll often find that a brother is labeled as mentally ill, put in an institution, and he is disinherited from the property. So in the case of men, the algorithm is the same. The outcomes are slightly different,
I see.
So
So again, it's the psychiatrists are kind of used as this police, but in this case to reinforce power of one group of men over someone to deny them of their inheritance or as part of an estate conflict or something. I think both of these are very reminiscent of what we've seen historically in psychiatry all over the world, including in the United States up into the 70s and 80s. And I have to say, it still happens today in some form. I've seen many people, I've worked with people who have lost their children or lost divorce proceedings or have been in conflicts around money, and then a diagnosis comes up in the court, and the judge rules against the person with the diagnosis just because they're called bipolar by their husband or just because they have some history of being in psychiatric hospitals. We see it in a kind of different way in a sense, but it's still the same power dynamic is happening.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, we I intervene in the case of another woman. She also is very much active in the public sphere. Her husband robbed her of all her four kids, and he tried to institutionalize her. And we were involved because she came into the house after doing a bit of shopping. Her husband had, in the meantime, called the security guard from the local mental hospital in Delhi. This was one woman, and to pick her up, there were 10 men and one woman. So they herded her into the van, and they took her to the local hospital, which claims to be one of the cleanest and the most human rights sensitive hospitals in India, an old colonial type institution run from the capital of India. And so the superintendent there said that, she's going to get royalty treatment, and, she's not going to be forced treated and stuff like that. Because we were continuously calling up and finding out what's going on to her friend. We couldn't find her. Where is she? And so on. And in any case, he said that she's in a private ward, But what actually happened was that he had, in order to terrify her and in order to get her consent in one way or the other, he had put her in the forensic psychiatric closed ward.
The forensic psych, that's where the people who have histories of violence or criminal charges end up in the forensic wards. It must have been a really terrifying place for her to be.
Yeah, yeah, she was terrified, and then we intervened and we kind of started calling up important people, and they called up the hospital, and then he said that no, sorry, sorry, it was a mistake. We shouldn't have done this. And then he moved her to a private ward, all the time pushing papers in front of her nose, saying that this is where you want to be.
To
And
get her to sign away her rights.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So this happens all the time. I mean, if you see the statistics on involuntary commitments in India, it's pretty high.
And both men and women are involuntarily committed in this way. What are some of the differences?
The difference is the extent of abuse that can happen to women inside these places. Recently, the Human Rights Watch brought out a report called Treated Worse Than Animals. They had gone inside these institutions to see how women were being treated. It's really a bad story. And they have filed a lot of petitions before different governments about institutional abuses. And I think that it's not about people being bad in these institutions. The people who run these institutions are not bad. It's just that that's the system we have inherited, whether it's the Indian railways or whether it's the Indian mental asylums. I relate it to having deep seated trauma of having been colonized over 200 years.
It's so powerful to hear about this because what you're describing is human rights efforts around psychiatry that really bring together the women's movement and the anti-colonial movement as well.
Absolutely. And India is like pretty thick on these linkages, because if you go to, and that's why working in Asia has been so liberating for me. You will not find institutions in the way you'd find them in India and other Commonwealth countries.
Countries that were not colonized in the same way
Yeah,
as
countries
India.
were not colonized. That's true of Africa, Latin America. About half the world is was not, they don't have these institutions or these laws. And it's the whole thing of being a victim of any kind of oppression. So some of us in India who are activists have to struggle with this victimhood of long-term trauma. Whereas in large parts of the world, particularly in Asia, like Nepal and Indonesia, some of these other countries, they don't have that history, nor do they feel so frustrated, angry, bitter, disappointed, and hopeless. Because those systems are not there, those laws are not there. You can start from scratch, building communities. Um, yeah, so and that's the interesting story, and that's where I see my hope and the hope of the Bapu Trust in actually being in spaces where you really don't have to be a trauma victim, either personally or in your work life. You don't have to keep repeating the story of trauma over and over again.
Help us understand that a little bit more. So you're saying that in India, with the legacy of colonialism and these huge institutions and this legal apparatus, it creates a very specific circumstance of victimization and victimhood, whereas in other parts of Asia, you don't see that. And so you're more hopeful. Tell us some examples of that. Help us understand that a little bit more.
Nepal, for example, Nepal is a clean slate. Nepal was never colonized, though they try to be in the shadow of India. But even then, they don't have a mental health law. They never had a mental health law. They don't have institutions. They have one hospital, which looks like any other hospital. It doesn't look like those big colonial type warehousing institutions where there are thousands and thousands of people naked, behind bars. You don't find those things. And if you talk to the people who go through psychological distress or stress or depression or what have you, they say that just treat us. I don't know what you're talking about, because when I, with my history of institution based trauma, when I started talking in as an activist, it was like in the rest of the West, it's like bring down those institutions. We don't want psychiatric medications. We hate the mental health law, and this is oppression, and stop the forced treat. It was like a lot of that. And then you go and talk to a Nepali, and he says, "What? Where? Where are those institutions? We want them."
that's the other side of it is perhaps in Nepal they have the traditional structures are in place, the traditions and the customs and the culture is in place. There hasn't been that history of colonialism, but isn't there also mistreatment and abuse of people who are going through extreme states and who are
Yeah, but it's not the same thing, you know.
how is it
Uh,
different? What are I mean, perhaps your mother might have had a very different outcome if she was in.
She chose to live in a temple. She chose to live in a temple all her life, you know. And we have done, you know, just to figure out whether my mom was deluded in going to temples, you know. And surely these temples must be as human rights violative as mental hospitals. We did interviews in around 20 temples. Temples, Sufi dargahs, churches. There are healing churches where Jesus Christ arrives every Thursday or Friday or whatever. You know, Jesus Christ comes in every week, and there is a palpable change of energy in the room when he arrives. You know, and so we went to all these places. We did video shootings. We interviewed like about 1,000 people, families. Are you benefiting? Why do you guys come here? What are your problems? How do you express your problems? Is it a mental illness? We did a whole range of interviews, really, really lengthy interviews. I can say that that system is very different from the mental institutions. In some places you will find that people are tied up, you know, but people are tied up in public, not inside some dingy dank closed wards where nobody ever goes and many people are dying in there. These are tied up right in front, and usually whenever a person is tied up, the family is right around them feeding them, the children are playing in the grounds, you know, they're all open out there for you to see. So it's very difficult to commit heinous violence when yeah, so there are community justice systems at work over here. But whereas in a mental institution, first of all, it's a legal power, it's the power of the state, whereas this is the power of communities. And the state comes in with all its machinery. It's got the security guards, it's got the ECT machines, the physical prison-like environment, and all of that. And it's got even it's we've heard so much about people being beaten up, people dying. And the pictures all the time, you know, get posted every now and then. So the kind of power we are talking about with respect to mental institutions in comparison to what happens in communities, these are two different levels of coercion.
So in the communities, is there more of a tolerance for deviant behavior? Is there more space for someone to become a renouncer or become very dedicated to their spirituality and to drop out of those ordinary roles of the household and business and working life? Is there more tolerance for that diversity?
I think so. I think so in urban areas. We work in the slums. We've been working in the slums for the last 10 years. These are low income communities, open housing, you know, people move in and out of their households. Your neighbor is in your face, you know, and there are good support systems because or everybody is poor, so you've got to depend on each other to cover for acute poverty or acute hunger and starvation. So people are really out there, you know, and if you interact with these people, you do find that there is a lot of tolerance. Though I would not say that there is no stigma, you know, that would be a bit too far. I think stigma is there, especially if you're a man and and you're like, you know, you've got like 3 kids and you've gone crazy and you're not able to work and all you want to do every day is wander. So then you're going to get into trouble with your wife and your mother. So that's for sure. That's for sure. So there are those negotiations which happen, but people usually, you know, they stand up for each other. And they're not thinking of, okay, let's put him in the mental hospital. That's not the first thing that will come to them. Whereas, yeah, I mean, the mental hospital system, if you're middle class, you'll find that people are looking at mental hospital and psychiatry far quicker.
What about the traditional treatments and the traditional cures and healing? Is that helping people in these temple contexts and these community contexts to move forward and to get more of a grip on their lives? Is it helping them to recover in a sense?
Like I said, you know, I spent a lot of my life as an atheist, and what really holds me to my life and brings hope and the will to live, you know, is spiritual pursuit. And we've seen that reflected in many of the interviews that we did in the Sufi dargahs, the churches, and the temples. You know, if you go out with an objective indicator, and there have been studies where people have gone out with objective indicators and found some elements of recovery, even in people with so-called psychosis. In terms of self experience and self report of what they go through, many people report feeling refreshed and feeling better, you know, after going through these spaces. And I'm an arts based therapist, and wherever we've gone, we've seen some expression of creativity in these places, whether it's drumming. We've seen lots and lots of drumming, shamanic drumming, cymbals, you know, the bells, rhythmic movement, body movements, muttering, you know, chanting, prayers, loud wailing, using the body to heal. And so we've seen a lot of this in these places. Women who would hesitate to even take off their head cover within their households, you can see them literally shedding clothes and somersaulting, you know, in some of these places. There's such body freedom. It cannot but have a good mental physiological effect. And I say that as someone who's continues to do heavy physical labor, you know, in order to feel good about myself. Yeah, so I think there are those expressions.
What is your vision of bringing together the best in traditional cultures with some of the more modern psychologies and modern approaches? What is it that really the Bapu Trust is really pushing as a way to get away from the colonial legacy and the psychiatric perspective?
We believe that if we use words and language and logic and reason, the possibility of conflict is very high. So we can spend many hours, you know, talking about the mental institutions and what's going on over there, and there could be different opinions and all of that. So this is one way. The other way is to be silent, cultivate the art of silence, and allow the body to respond with its different sensory capacities, and allow the body to quieten down, calm down, and heal itself. And if visions of God or visions of demons help us in our path of recovery, then that's all very fine. And so we use a lot of drumming and chanting, muttering and breathing, and different kinds of breathing, involuntary movements, art and creativity, song making. So some of these we have derived actually from traditional healing systems. Buddhism has played a huge part in our growth, in the growth of our programs, particularly Buddhist emphasis on the impermanence of emotions, you know, and our mental lives. The fact that it's like a river, never once the same for a moment, you know. And so some of these principles have helped us to kind of have a more dynamic view about ourselves as people in change, and as people very much capable of rejuvenating and recovering ourselves in the moment. We do have a community mental health program which kind of applies some of the principles that I just spoke about: peace building, how to reduce conflict, how to be calm, how to build body discipline so that you're not, you know, jumping out of your body at the moment, you know, you're triggered by something or the other, how to hold your communications to a point where you're saying just what is objective and not what is emotional. How do you kind of have an everyday practice that will increase your stamina and endurance, and improve your fitness, your lung capacity, you know, the amount of oxygen you take into your body? How do you change your diet? So these are everyday practices, you know, and I think that just like we have everyday practices of brushing teeth and wearing clothes and ironing them and polishing the shoes, if we spend like half an hour every day, so I call it peace of mind on the go. And I think this can be taught. It's a practice, it's a skill. It's there's nothing spiritual about it, though it can lead to really strange experiences, and you can feel like you're really connected with God, and you can see Jesus Christ in your garden and stuff like that. But a lot of it is body practice, and I think those can be taught in simple ways.
And does this fit with the traditional cultures? Is this something that really builds on what's there already in the communities?
Yeah, yeah. If you're across Asia, you have, you know, Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga. You have all kinds of practices which are really very useful, and they humanize cities. And there are many places. In Pune, for example, we are a small city, but Bapu Trust is one of them, which works in low-income communities. But around the city, there are a number of these, what so to speak, quiet rooms. You go in there and you just be for a bit. You watch your impulses, you watch the anger coming up. You figure out who you hate, and you just watch that and let that emotion go. And there's lots of this kind of thing going on. It comes from Buddhism, Buddhist practices, some of them Hindu chanting prayers, sometimes Christian melodies. You have all those things.
Bhargavi, we are just about out of time. Give people the contact information that they can get in touch with you and they can find out more about your work and more about the work of the Bapu Trust.
Yeah, we're at www.baputrust.com. It's BAPUTRUST.com. So, and another way to reach me is at my personal email ID, which is bvdavar@gmail.com. If you search for Bhargavi Davar, you will hit some of these sites.
Bhargavi Davar, thank you so much for joining us today on Madness Radio.
Thanks a lot, Will. Thanks a lot for this opportunity. I very much look forward to being in touch with you.
You've been listening to an interview with Bhargavi Davar. She's a childhood survivor of mental institutions, a philosopher, and a psychologist. She's the founder and the director of the Bapu Trust, a mental health and disability agency in Pune, India, and working throughout Asia, and also a co-coordinator of INTAR, the International Network Towards Alternatives and Recovery. That's all the time we have on Madness Radio. Thanks for tuning in. You've been listening to Madness Radio, Voices and Visions from Outside Mental Health. Madness Radio is sponsored by the Icarus Project and Portland Hearing Voices. Host is Will Hall and producer is Nina Packabush. Madness Radio can be heard on KBOO-FM and the Pacifica Network, and shows are archived online at madnessradio.net.